Okay, now let's get on to what I call extreme safety think. And I wrote that with, bad language because I want you to think about this. Extreme safety think. Both of those go together. What you need to understand is in previous generations, we had a lot of fire safety experience and training because they were dealing with fires all the time. The fires in the fireplace, the coal oil lamps, and things like that. So they were very, very experienced with them. Now we are very inexperienced. Our grandparents lived with fire safety thinking every day, and there was a lot of fires that they had back then, and so they were really cognizant of that, but they still had their problems. And nowadays, we don't use coal oil lamps. We don't use these things very much. We use them a little bit occasionally outside and on camping, but now what if you're using them every day? What you have to understand is you've got to be conscious of fire safety that our society no longer has. We just don't. We don't do that all the time. So you're going to have to be extremely careful, particularly with young people and children who are like moths drawn to a candle flame. They want to circulate around that and burn things, do all kinds of things, and that's going to cause a problem. So you have to think about that. Now, the other thing, one of the fatal facts of using some of these fuels, I've already mentioned a little bit about this, and if people are trying to maintain a lifestyle, in other words, the lifestyle that you have right now with the automatic heater and furnace in your house with a thermostat and what have you in the winter is, we've got a problem trying to do that. One of the issues is, of course, carbon dioxide. This is an odorless, colorless, it's a silent killer in that because it's a byproduct of all combustion. And what happens is that all flames put off carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide, it's not actually what we would call poisonous, but it'll simply smother you. The safest appliances to use inside the house in a structure would be natural gas, propane, alcohol, and kerosene, because the only thing that they're mostly producing is going to be carbon dioxide, which just by venting and having be sure that you have some windows and doors that are cracked and you're using that, then you're not going to be have this carbon dioxide build up in the bloodstream like carbon monoxide will do. Carbon and one oxygen, which is a byproduct of from incomplete combustion of any kind of a gas, but in particular when you're using some of these others I mentioned. Now, the problem with carbon monoxide, it binds very tightly with the blood hemoglobin and it builds up in the blood because it binds tighter than the carbon dioxide does. When you exhale through the lungs carbon dioxide, and then you pick up some oxygen and it carries it around through the bloodstream in there. In the case of carbon monoxide, when the blood circulates by the little membranes in the lungs, it doesn't give up. It doesn't get rid of it. It stays bound to that blood. So what's happening is it's building up over time, and you're suffocating from really the inside because your blood doesn't have the ability to pick up oxygen anymore. So that's a real problem. And the worst fuels to use that are really going to be producing a lot of carbon monoxide, I already mentioned, are gasoline, white gas, charcoal, and coal. So they cannot be used unvented inside the house because the carbon monoxide is going to build up from your gasoline and white gas stoves. And so they have to be used outside because that will kill you. And we had a very good family friend that was killed from carbon monoxide poisoning and also carbon dioxide, a little bit of that, but carbon monoxide that was occurring from a white gas lantern that was used inside a tent. And you would think like, oh my heck, inside a tent, how tight are a tent? Well, when it was all zipped up and closed up, and he and his brother were reading inside this tent. He was a very experienced outdoorsman. He camped with us many times, and after he retired from his where he worked with my father. He was on a camping trip, and he just simply fell asleep in his tent when it was sealed up, when he was reading in there, and the carbon monoxide got him. He was found out there. So when I say don't use it inside, I mean don't use it inside. Something else you may want to consider is how you can make fuels last longer, because here again, we have this idea of keeping my comfort and my lifestyle and everything, but you're going to have to think differently is what it comes down to. Your attitude is going to have to adjust because it's like I can't replenish this stuff very easily, and I've got to react and think differently to the situations so that I'm not going to use up my stuff all of a sudden. And so there's going to be some lifestyle changes. We're no longer in Kansas, Toto. You have to think like that. And the other thing you want to be considering in this is that having a warm house, constant warm house like we've had in the past, unless the house has been designed that way, and you can design a house that will never, never get cold. That's one of the things I used to do years ago. But if you haven't done that and you have your standard American white man house with the natural gas heater in it, what have you, um, that house is going to get cold. And if you're trying to use your fuels to keep it warm, you're going to use a tremendous amount of fuels to keep that warm. So maintaining a lifestyle of having things comfortable all the time is a problem. So here's how you have to think about using your fuels. First, it's for cooking and sanitizing. And oh, by the way, when you're cooking and sanitizing, you're going to get some heat off that stove a little bit, and you can use it in that area, in that limited area within the house. But then, it's important to use, fuels you're going to be using them for getting some light, and you'll get a little bit of heat off that, but not a whole lot. So, where you're going to use your fuels and how you use them. I'm not going to use it so much for heating, the liquid fuels in particular, because I just can't maintain the heat in my house that way. So you can significantly reduce the area that you heat in a house. That's by using plastic sheet and tarps that you hang up so that if I'm now cooking in the area where the cook stove is, that in that area I can try to keep it warm, but I'm going to let the bedrooms and everything else get cold. And that's the way it used to be. They had one heating device usually in the kitchen where they're cooking, and that area was warm, and the parlor off of that, it was heated. And the rest of the house got cold, and the upstairs bedrooms, they didn't try to heat. A little bit of it got up there, but they weren't trying to heat them. You didn't have central heat. Okay. So what you have to do is think about conserving fuels, and you really have to think community. This is where community comes in because, your stored fuels are going to be extremely limited. And some of them have to be carefully managed and utilized to the best benefit of really everybody. And when you come to the biomass, gathering of fuels, population density and the lack of tools can be severely limit the capacity of gathering these fuels. But you'll want to think in terms of community and managing these things because greed and entitlement, we have what I call the Easter Island effect, where you're going to burn everything up and use it all up, and then what the heck are you going to do? And it can also lead to arguments and people being unhappy about, I need fuel, you have fuel, and I want your fuel, and so you got to think a little bit differently. That's another topic for another time. Let's think about conserving fuels. That's one of the things you have to do. Well, we have all these lamps and lanterns and things like this that we want to use. Well, I can conserve my kerosene and my propane if I have some of these flashlights. And in this case, these are ones that don't use batteries. This is a shake up. This is a shake up. This is a wind up right in there. I can also have some that are solar charged. And so while these things are still operable, I can be conserving my fuel for lighting by using these. Now, by the way, let's see, when we go in the lighting area, I'll talk a little bit more about that because these things are not quite as magic as a lot of people think that they are. Okay, so we're going to be cooking in here. How to conserve fuel. Put a lid on your pot. And in particular, if you use a pressure cooker, that's a real energy saver because you bring that pot up to pressure and then you take that pressurized pot, you put it in what's called a straw box cooker in the old days, or they call them the Wonder Box, the Magic Box, or thing like that. This is little cushions that have these little beads in them inside of this. So put it down inside of there and then put the top on it, just let it sit in there. Suppose you hadn't made one of those things or bought one of those things. You're going like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Okay, get a cardboard box and a bunch of newspaper and just wad them up and stuff them in there and put the top on that box in there and just let that pressure cooker sit in there. And while it's at pressure and then it's going to be cooling down and the pressure will be coming off of it, it's still cooking. And so that will conserve heat because you don't have to leave it on the stove all the time, just boiling away, boiling away. You heat it up once, bring it to pressure, and then put it down inside of a box or something and let it cook. Now we've done this for years and years ago. That's using the little thermos bottles here. Do the same kind of a thing with your wheat berries or other things that you have. Is bring the water to a boil. Put your oatmeal down inside of here. Pour the boiling water on it. You can have your butter and sugar if you want to use those things. Put the top on it, and just let it set overnight. Do that when you go to bed, and the next morning it's all ready to do. And I've done that with the wheat berries, letting them whole wheat berries with a little bit of honey and butter in there, and the boiling water poured on them, and sealed up. They're ready in the morning. Of course, I can concentrate the sun and heat that way. Here I am showing this one. That pot down in here is running at 228 degrees. I can also use some heat recovery. Here's well, in fact, I'll talk more about this in the lighting area, but I'll mention it here. We're conserving fuel. Here's my Aladdin lantern and a tomato cage and a chimney that I put on that. And then I have, if you look down in the top in there, I have this crosshatch of wire. I can put a pot in the top like that. And of course, then I have the chimney around it. And I can be cooking down in that pot while I'm getting light because I needed light. So I can, recover some heat that way. Of course, then think about some of your non-cook options that you have with fermenting of things and making cheeses and all those things. Foods that you don't have to cook, you can sprout them. I can eat, my sprouted wheat berries and things like that. So all these things can be done to conserve fuel. And then inside structures on this, then, well, what do you do in the winter? We talk about this. In fact, I'll be talking about this starting more come on Saturday as I'm doing the cold weather class called Winter Without Worries. But I have these fuels that I use inside my house. But if I'm trying to heat my house all the time and maintain my lifestyle, you can use a huge amount of fuel in a hurry. So the right clothing can reduce the demand on that. And this is where we have the thermal johns that we've had people make for years. Make them yourself or sell them. Where you're going to put that on is super insulated underwear that I can wear 24 hours a day for 7 days a week inside of a chilly house that may be at 25 degrees or 35 degrees or so, but I can be very comfortable in a house like that if I'm wearing this kind of clothing. More on that at another time. The sunlight can help us to reduce our heat. If you add an attached greenhouse to a house, that'll be bringing in heat into the house as well as producing some nice, clean, fresh air and a place where you can be growing plants that I don't have to use energy for them. Here's another one right here with the inflated type things that I talk about attached to the house. And if it was a house that was designed that way, actually designed around one of these sun scoops, you could be completely not needing any kind of heat to it at all. I can use a little bit of photovoltaics by capturing some sunlight to be used for a little bit of lighting and things like that, and or for some other tools so I don't have to run a generator. All right. So the role of fuels in provident living, it's a material that we burn to produce work and to support things within these other 9 modules.